Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a special ABNY event in recognition of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. New York City, our city, is home to the second largest Asian American population in the United States. Asian culture is a vital part of our city and one of the really anchors that makes us who we are and that makes New York so special. So when we see the appalling surge in hate crimes against our Asian American neighbors and community members, we must all stand up and take action. What that means, it means using our voice to speak out and fight against injustice and intolerance. It means to support Asian American businesses and restaurants, and to take a moment and appreciate the countless contributions that Asian Americans have had that make our city what it is. That's the impetus behind today's event as we gather an esteemed panel for this morning. So what we're going to do, this is an effort to celebrate the AAPI community's contributions to our city, to learn about impactful organizations that we can all really lean in on and assist, and to recognize the challenges that have arisen with the surge in recent hate crimes. So to get us started, I have the great pleasure of introducing a wonderful business and community leader who we are proud to have part of our ABNY community. Jill Sung is the CEO of Abacus, Federal Savings Bank, a local and growing business founded to help the immigrant community in Lower Manhattan that has grown to have branches throughout New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Here at ABNY, we are very excited that Jill recently joined the board of our foundation. Jill, thank you for really what you and your family have done for New York. It's my privilege to turn the Zoom over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. I wanted to thank you as well, and Melva and the ABNY team for sponsoring and organizing this very important event, and to pull together such a distinguished panel of I would call veterans of this of our community. I know many of you well and have fought side by side with you on many issues that we've seen. I just wanted to say this is one of the most brutal periods I can remember, and my memory is getting longer now as the years go by, for our AAPI community, not just nationwide, but also as New Yorkers. I feel like we feel things just more intensely and intensifyingly. So, I just, for me, the pandemic was not the beginning of the challenges we have faced as a community. I think it's a continuum of these challenges, and I see it sort of in my way as two things our community is facing, and one of them is taken and granted for. I believe that our community has been taken for granted in many ways, and I also will see this as another taken advantage of, and I believe our community has in the history of this country been taken advantage of as well. So this, the more clear form of these two takens through the violence, it's not surprising to me that we are seeing this today with these two issues that have been going on for a very, very long time. For me in particular, I am going to be looking forward to hearing from the panel, and for the next couple of months as we enter into a new transition of leadership in this city, across all levels, and as well as we are seeing the new transition in the federal level. I'm going to be looking forward to seeing what material steps and what long-term changes we will be seeing as a community to deal with these issues. I know things already have been starting to work for. I applaud the passing of the COVID-19 hate crime bill that happened yesterday. I know President Biden has to sign off on it, but it certainly gives a platform for our community and others around us to try to use that to try to solve issues that we are seeing. But I ultimately want to say that the tone is set at the top. And as a small business leader in my entity and what I see in my community, I know that very well. So I am looking forward to engaging with all those on this call and all those who are watching and anybody else to work through these issues together, and to look at all levels of governments and business and individuals and organizations to ensure that we set that tone appropriately and to hold those who have the power accountable to ensure that we are able to face these challenges well together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, and for giving us such an important frame on the conversation we're about to have. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Angelene Superable. I'm going to start with the most important role she has. She is a member of the ABNY Young Professional Steering Committee, and we are psyched to have her on our committee. As you can see from her background, she has a day job working with the mayor and City Hall. I want to say thank you for your public service and thank you for moderating for us today. Angelene, over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And can I just say that this is an incredible opportunity. I actually came to ABNY as a Coro Fellow for a placement about 3 years ago, where I met Wayne and Joanne through a project that I was doing as my capstone project, trying to understand the Asian American identity and how it affects New York City politics. So I feel like this is a moment coming really full circle where I get to hang out with some of the superheroes of our city and really learn more about what's going on in their minds as they make really critical decisions day to day. So I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to be here with my ABNY family as well. And I want to introduce our panelists. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say everybody's name and title, but we all know that titles have many underlying meanings. So I want everyone to have a moment to dig into what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. So we'll go ahead in that in an order that I will tell you in a second. But first I want to introduce Wayne. He's the president and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council. And then there's Joanne Yu, the executive director of the Asian American Federation. Yin Kong, the director of Think Chinatown, and also my friend, Kapil Longani, who's the counsel to the mayor. Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm so excited to moderate this conversation with you. And Wayne, I'll have you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you very much to ABNY for inviting us to be part of this event, and especially during this critical time for the AAPI community. Thank you to Angelene for the warm welcome. So as President and CEO of CPC, Chinese American Planning Council, which is the largest Asian American social services nonprofit in the country, and we serve over 60,000 New Yorkers per year. A third are Asian American, mostly Chinese. The other third represents the diversity of New York, so Black, Brown, immigrant, and other low-income New Yorkers. As CEO of a human services agency, I feel a lot of my work is really entering spaces with human services, nonprofit leaders, to government agency funders, to the philanthropic community, and really discussing what happens in the Asian American community. Our issues around poverty, immigration, family issues that are often not discussed and are not reflected in government policy or philanthropic giving. Thank you very much again for being here, and I look forward to the conversation with my colleagues and allies.
Excellent. Joanne, off to you.
Good morning, everybody. Jill, good to see you. You know, when Melva sends out a invitation, it's really hard to say no. It's really hard to say no to your friends, no matter how busy you are. But it's really great to be on this panel. Right before we started, Melva and I were complaining about how hot it was in our apartments. And as I'm complaining, I'm also drinking a hot cup of coffee. So that's how my morning is going. But it's a pleasure to be here at ABNY. Thank you so much for this invitation. My name is Joanne Yu, and I'm the executive director of the Asian American Federation. We're an umbrella leadership organization of about 70 nonprofits that serve our city. Most of our members are Asian-led, Asian-board, Asian-serving. And my day-to-day job is to make sure that our member agencies are doing well, that our community is supported, that we have a seat at the leadership table, that very much what Jill said, that we are very invisible. And right now, during this time when we are hyper visible in a bad way, how do we use this opportunity to make sure that the issues impacting our community are highlighted? We make some progress on policy, but also with the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes, how do we keep our community safe? And so it's been an interesting and horrific year, but I'm really glad to be here with friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Yeah, I really want to echo what you said. And that's something that we're going to dig into a little bit in the conversation. But this idea that Asians are really invisible and aren't necessarily considered people of color here in America. And so in this moment, I really appreciate the work that you, Wayne, Yin, and Kapil and Jill are doing to, really make a statement that, Asians are here to stay, that we belong here, and also that we have issues that affect across communities of color. So appreciate that so much. Yin, off to you.
Thanks, Angelene. I'm Yin Kong, director of Think Chinatown. So we're a lot smaller than these two great organizations. We're only based in Manhattan's Chinatown. We're a small team, emerging nonprofit. I actually just recently became full-time. Before I was, like holding down different jobs, trying to like make this work, scrappy style. Think Chinatown works at the intersection of art, storytelling, and neighborhood engagement. So it sounds broad, but we're all using the tools that we have at our capacity to really support what we love about Chinatown. So a day-to-day for me is producing art and storytelling projects. So as you both were saying before, it's so important to really showcase our stories of everyday Chinatown community members. So we produce stories about immigration, Asian American identity, but really, yes, that message that we belong here, and our history is part of American history, not Chinese or Asian American history only, but a greater American history. I also keep an eye on neighborhood issues, as a lot of the time things happen at Chinatown. So for instance, working a lot with Jill to help our community members understand what's happening for the mayor's plan for the mega jail, communicating out and helping our community members who don't speak English or who may not have that much time to connect in, with helping them with their civic engagement and making that easier. Also, rezoning, upzoning that's happening in Soho NoHo that actually really affects a part of Chinatown as well. So we hold presentations and such on that. And a lot of my time also is just organizing neighborhood events. We have a really big one coming up, Chinatown Nights on Forsyth Plaza, May 28th. But it's a lot of me like running around like, can I borrow your speaker? Because it's a lot of like community work. We have a scrappy budget, but we run around and make things work.
Appreciate that so much, Ian. And last but certainly not least, Kapil Longani.
Thanks, Angelene. I want to thank everybody for putting together this really terrific panel. I am Chief Counsel to the Mayor of New York City. In many ways, I think my job is to provide solutions to the mayor on a regular basis. I, in many ways, fancy myself as his solutions czar. Our office really handles every major legal issue that you could imagine, from affordable housing to police reform to emergency powers, and of course, everything under the sun related to the COVID-19 response, including the standing up of the testing and tracing unit, vaccine distribution, things like that. So my office has hands in a lot of pots, but that's what makes the job really amazing. I'm also really proud that the mayor appointed me as senior advisor to our Charter Revision Commission, which is also, I know we have a member of that commission on this panel. And it's something I'm really proud of, because I think, again, in sort of talking about things that we're doing here to help the AAPI community, that's certainly a place where I think we can all make a difference. And I encourage everybody to be involved in that panel and the charter revision process, because for those of you that don't know, the charter is basically the Constitution of New York City. So I really encourage people to do that. But getting back to my job, I wear two political hats. I wear two hats, one political and one legal, because there's really no decision in my office that is purely legal. And so that's what makes my job really interesting and I hope effective. So yeah, that's what I do.
Thank you so much, Kapil. So I'd love to, for our first question, dig into our identities and how they affect the work that we do in our current roles. So Wayne knows this, Joanne knows this, Kapil knows this, and then you'll find out soon. And so will you, Jill. But my identity is largely the reason that I'm here at City Hall. I remember when I was a Coro Fellow a few years ago, I was walking in, interviewing deputy mayors, talking to senior advisors, and I didn't see people who looked like me walking through the halls of City Hall. And I said to myself, why not? You know, what is it about my identity that we don't feel welcome here, or that this doesn't seem like a viable career path, whatever. But I think now, especially looking at my tenure at the mayor's office, from working on Democracy NYC to serving as the mayor's special assistant and briefing director, to now working in his comms and press shop as a deputy press secretary and a comms advisor, I'm like, my identity is so critical to the way that I view and make decisions. It is critical to the meetings that I take versus the meetings I don't, the fights I choose to pick about the words that we're using to describe communities of color, etc. So I'm curious, I'm sure that this has had like motivationally affected why you are here today, but I'm also curious to hear how your identity affects your job and the role that you are in now. So we'll go to Kapil first.
Yeah, thanks, Angelene. I'll just say, and you know this as well, I'm really proud to work for a mayor that cares very deeply about diversity, and the fact that Angelene and I are in the positions that we're in, I think is strong evidence of that. Look, being Asian is an innate part of my identity. We're all products of our experience. I was born in India. I came here when I was 6-7 months old. We immigrated to New York City. Both my parents are public servants. In fact, my dad came to this country, or entered the green card lottery, after watching John F. Kennedy's speech about America being the first to go to the moon. And at that time, he was a young student and a long, long way away from America. Came from a relatively poor family, but just knew enough people to know that India had a green card lottery. And so he entered it. And he won, so to speak. And he came here, and his first job was actually right outside my window. He used to sell pens to New Yorkers, because even though he was an engineer, he couldn't speak English. And at that time, he didn't know where he could learn English. And it took a couple years for my mom to teach him English. But in the interim, that's what he did. And my mom is also a public servant. She's a principal of an elementary school. She's been there for almost 30 years now. And my dad eventually realized his dream and worked at NASA for, again, almost 25 years. And so I think that heritage, my Asian heritage, as well as like the fact that they instilled in me an obligation to be really proud, like to not hide my identity, but to be really proud of it. And to use our rich heritage to not only enhance my life, but the lives of people around me. And so for me, I can't imagine, obviously I can't imagine not being Asian, but every day I just find it to be so important to the work that I do. Because as I said, we're all products of our experience, and being Asian, and being surrounded by Asian people throughout my life, family, friends, etc., has had a direct effect upon the things that I do. Why I became a lawyer, for example, in terms of really focusing on equity and justice and fairness. I think we've all, I'm sure, been stereotyped in various ways throughout our life. And one of the things I wanted to do in being a lawyer was to become a leader so that I could stand up for vulnerable people in our community and others as well. And so that passion of justice and equity, and working towards progressive policies to enrich and support our community, it's just been a theme throughout my life, and I attribute to my Asian background and heritage.
That is so fantastic. Thank you, Kapil. Joanne, what are your thoughts? How has your identity affected your work in leading so many different nonprofits through your umbrella organization?
My job is to support the nonprofits to make sure that I could declare a path for them to be able to do all the great work that they're doing. I feel like, the Federation, we're a small shop. We're going to be 11 people soon. we're at 10 now. We have a new person joining. And I feel like, our job is to really make the weapons for our member agencies to use, right? It's to pump out research. It's to bring people to the table with stakeholders to talk about what our community is going through. But the one thing that is never lost on me, I too am an immigrant. I came when I was 9 from Korea. So immigration, I think about how impactful that move was. And my parents moved here because they are the parents of 3 daughters, right? And in Korea, there were conversations in the family about why my father only had daughters and not sons. And I think my parents definitely had some very important conversations about giving us an opportunity and to chart our own course in life beyond the gender stereotypes in Korea at the time. And so we're infinitely grateful to our parents. But, when I came here, I had to learn English. Kids are mean. You don't even know that kids are mean because you don't even speak the language, right? But then, as all kids do, you learn English very quickly. It's amazing how fast, like in a year, you're able to help navigate. And so at some point, one of the things that I fight for a lot, right? Because I look around and see the neighborhood, and we're always going to be an immigrant receiving city. And what I look at a lot is how immigrants integrate, right? And the first thing that is the critical piece of that is language, right? Language access. And I realize that that's probably the hill that I will die on. And I will pick that fight as long as I need to, because I was a language broker for my community. As a kid, you're having to translate stuff, going to the doctors, to the principal's office to talk about somebody's kid, going to a divorce proceeding, right? Like, what the hell do I know as a 12-year-old kid, right? And not even having the vocabulary in English, yet alone in Korean, right? And having to help people navigate, because people cannot navigate for themselves. And so I realized that, we talk about all of these different integration programs, but ultimately the linchpin of all of this is, how do we communicate? How do we make sure that people get the information that they need in their language? So, and there are times that I will tell you in this work that I am beyond frustrated, right? Because I'm thinking, man, here I am, almost 50 years later, and we're still fighting the same fight. So sometimes I get to be really angry at people like Kapil, and shake my fist at City Hall. But it's all because we are all advocates and we are trying to do what is right for our community. And so I think, the thing that I am probably the proudest of is that, and I've been in New York for almost 25 years doing immigrant rights work. I think the thing that I'm most proud of is working to expand language access from 6 to 10 languages at the city and state level, and because that it ultimately is creating a really critical pathway for people like us, people on this panel, to come here and to succeed.
Yeah. Before we move to Yin, I want to dig in a little bit more, Joanne, into what you said there. I heard you say almost 50 years later, I'm still fighting the same fight. And I know you highlighted language access, but I'm curious, what are some other fights? What are some other challenges that you have seen have been consistent throughout your year in working in immigrant and Asian American rights?
I'm going to go back to what Jill said about indivisibility. Asians are invisible, right? And even now in some of the tables that I sit at, right? I get invited to a lot of fancy places now, which is kind of weird for me because I'm kind of not a fancy girl, but it's the fact that I look around and I think, wow, why am I the only person of color here? Shouldn't there be, we need to have better representation. And so, I've been, the crazy places that I've been, and I don't consider that it is an honor, right? It's a privilege, but I also feel like, well, how do I say, how come there aren't more people who look like me? Or how come there aren't more people of color? How come there aren't more women, right? How come there aren't more immigrants? Those are the I think that's a really important piece for me. But, the lack of assistance for small business, right? Lack of representation in corporate America. Hell, we just got I mean, think about the celebration we had at Crazy Rich Asian, right? Because there were people who looked like us on the big screen. Like in every way, that needle of representation and visibility has not moved much in 50 years. And so, it's something to be something to lament, certainly, but I think it is, progress is slow. And, I think about how we use this opportunity in this time of like tremendous pain for everybody to be able to build coalitions, to work in solidarity with other communities of color, with our fellow New Yorkers, to be able to learn and understand the challenges of every community and to be able to be supportive.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And on that note of representation, I think that's a perfect segue to talk to you, Yin, about the work that you do. But I saw a statistic from Next Shark, which is very quickly become my favorite news source for all things Asian. But it came out yesterday, or maybe this morning, that 5.9% of all Asians who appear on television or on movies have a speaking role. That's like almost not even a full 6 people out of 100 having a speaking role. To me, that's absolutely ridiculous. How are we just having Asian Americans show up, be tokenized, just to have their face in the background, just to be the sidekick who doesn't say anything? How are we going to dispel all of these like model minority myths, all of these like harmful stereotypes that have been perpetuated against our community? Yin, off to you.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I just finished reading Interior Chinatown last night, so it's very on point. If anyone wants to join us for a book club with Asia Society, that'll be happening, I think, on the 20th. So join us for that.
Incredible book. Yeah.
But yes, and going back to Joanne's point about invisibility, like we need to be the creators of our own stories, right? We need to, be the one to create the art and the stories that represent us, and that's very much what we strive to do with Think Chinatown. But back to the question about identity, I think a lot of it is if you have that immigrant experience, like I'm an immigrant, my family are immigrants from different places. Actually, all of our family members come from a different country. My first language was Mandarin, which was not the first language of either of my parents. It was Cantonese and Fujianese, and so they split the difference with Mandarin. And so I think having that experience, where the stories are. Like my mom was a garment worker when she first left China. And it was actually a very special experience for me. That right now we're working on a story about a community member who's a garment worker for decades here in Chinatown, in one of those tenement workshops. And I'd actually never been in one before. It was just stories from my childhood that my mom would tell me about staring at the clock, just wishing it would go faster, and how tough times were when she first came over. And I got to visit one because the Tenement Museum has, a replica that they've made. So we're working with the Tenement Museum on this project. And so we brought this mother-daughter duo who did an interview there about, their story there. And for me, it was so touching because I finally had visuals to go with these stories I've been hearing. And that's what we do with the storytelling projects. We pair artists, API artists who also care about these topics, who are dedicated to creating these visuals that give value and honor our stories. It's not just like we're recording people and we leave it there, right? We have to really elevate and honor their stories and show, look, they're important, look, they're interesting, look, they may not be happy all the time, but these are our stories and they're important. And so I think, maybe because of, my own family's experience, my own experience, I'm able to figure out which stories to lift up. Another story project that is very simple, but I found have touched specifically immigrant Americans way more, is our Everyday Chinatown project, where we do stories about very simple objects that everyone knows. Like maybe it's like a feng shui bagua mirror, or it's like a plastic penzi, the type with like the cartoon characters, like the plastic basins, the cartoon characters on the bottom, right? these are all things that we know about, but like maybe, you know, other New Yorkers don't know about or other Americans don't know about, but they're so simple and they connect us all. And it's a really easy way to get people to start talking, even though a lot of our elders are like, oh no, my story isn't important. So getting them to start talking and teasing it out of them, I think is like really half the work. And I think another important part about the immigrant experience is like really knowing how to navigate different spaces, right? You know, with the Chinatown space, we have, you know, the white space, and knowing how to bridge the two and advocate for your community in other spaces, which is the work I hope that Chinatown's really doing is, you know, being that connective tissue.
Wow, that was really, really elegantly said. I think that's exactly right. It's all about, it's almost like code switching, right? I don't know if folks are like familiar with that term in the audience. I'm sure all of y'all are here because we've done it. We do it to survive in the workplaces that we have, in the communities that we lead, and that in our own families, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead, Yin.
I was going to say a lot of the work, we actually call it cultural translation, is kind of explaining, you know, our stories to others, because a lot of the times, you know, we're represented, you know, by others that, you know, so taking that opportunity to actually do the cultural translation work ourselves. And also, I forgot to mention before, like, I also spent a lot of time in China as an adult, you know, going back as like an American Chinese, you know, going there and seeing the differences, but also learning a lot there really helped me do that cultural translation work coming back to the US. And because there's different, I feel like Chinese and Asian Americans, they have different levels of cultural attachment or understanding. And so a lot of the work is even within ourselves, cultural translations within our own community is also important to, you know, get on the same page.
Absolutely. So I literally could talk to y'all all day. I mean, we have so much to get through and so much to talk about. Unfortunately, we don't have a full day to talk about everything, but we should find time soon. That being said, in about like 20 minutes or so, we're going to flip to audience Q&A. We've got a lot of folks who have tuned into our conversation, and I'm very thankful to them. I just want to offer them the opportunity. If there are specific questions that you want our panelists to answer, feel free to share them with us by hitting the Q&A function, and we'll make sure to get to those later. And you can share a question for all of the panelists or a specific panelist if you've heard something that really resonates with you. So back to Wayne, I want to hear from you. How has identity affected your work with CPC?
Like others on this Zoom, I'm also an immigrant. My family, I was born in Singapore. My family moved to California. So I always remember being the only Asian kid in my elementary school, or my class in elementary school, and being in ESL programs. And I just always remember who had access to better resources, who, as I moved up through the public school system in San Jose, California, seeing who's in gifted and talented classes, who's in AP and honors classes, and who's not in those classes. And I was fortunate that, you know, I had access to those programs after I learned English and because of the support of my family. So fast forward to New York City, I carry that a lot with me about thinking always about access and resources, which I think ultimately leads to power, is what we're discussing here. So I moved to New York in 2004 to run CACF, the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. And I did that for 9 years. And as part of that work, I always recall that we need to make sure that Asian Americans are at the table. And I'm sure this is something that Asian American Federation Joanne needs to always keep an eye on, is when we're talking about the Asian American community, we need to make sure we include all the dozens of ethnic groups and language and dialect groups that are there. So at CACF, our challenge was always making sure that East Asian, Southeast Asian, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians are included in the dialogue at the table, and the needs, the unique needs, are being discussed. And I think that's where, fast forward to after that stint, I went over to be second in charge at FPWA, the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, which has a long history in the Black churches in New York City. And I just recall that every time we had panels and every time we had speaking engagement and every time we're highlighting a member agency, I always had to remind the team, let's make sure that there's an Asian representative there. And it can't always be the organization I run now, which is CPC. And I want to be clear, I don't think it was malicious. I don't think they were trying to render the community invisible, but I think that that's where Asian Americans are not top of mind when we're talking about policies or when we're talking about programs and services that are needed. So, and I think a lot of this comes back to the model minority stereotype that people assume we all do well, we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, we're taking over the specialized high schools, we're going to go off to the best universities and we'll get a great job. But as stats that come from the Asian American Federation to show how the stereotype negatively impacts our community, New York City contracts out about $4 billion a year to human services. About 1.5% of that goes to Asian American nonprofits. The same thing at the state level. It's even worse at the state level. According to CACF's research, the city council's discretionary funding, about 3% to 4% goes to Asian American nonprofits. And that's after 10 years of advocating for more equitable funding from the city council. We see it too with philanthropy. When APIP puts out its report, it's the same numbers, 2% of the dollars goes to the community. And I think, I remember when Bloomberg had his Center for Economic Opportunity and they recalculated the federal poverty level and made it relevant to New York, the Asian American community went from the least poor racial group to the poorest racial group. Over 25% of Asian Americans in New York City struggle with poverty. And I remember meeting with City Hall and saying, well, now that you have your own stats on poverty in the Asian American community, here's the inequities in funding, what are we going to do about it? And their reply was, we don't know. And I think that's the problem, is that we have these stereotypes of being the model minority. We have these stereotypes of being the perpetual foreigner. And that's what leads to a lack of policies, a lack of programs, a lack of perceptions that understand what our communities need and deserve.
That's exactly right. I think you hit the nail on the head. And it's interesting because layered on top of the model minority myth, as we've talked about it now, we also have the pandemic. And so many people are calling out being like, blame, like I literally saw today a business in New Mexico had to like go out of business because they put a sign outside that said blame China. When the reality is, us New Yorkers know, even the mayor has affirmed in his daily avails, the virus didn't come from China. It came from Europeans who were traveling to New York City and then spread. But that being said, we can't scapegoat or blame one group for what's happening across the world today. But we're seeing it happen right in front of our eyes. And that has led to a spike in hate crime. I mean, we know that the last president's rhetoric surrounding Asian folks didn't help either, like added more fire to the fire. And I'm curious to hear from y'all, how are you feeling about the spike in AAPI, anti-Asian violence that's happening across the country? And how has that affected your work, your day-to-day, everything that you're doing now? And I think we can loosen up the dialogue a little bit. We can go ahead and popcorn to whoever feels comfortable to go next, because this is a really big question and we would be remiss to not speak about it now.
I can go first.
Yes.
I got a lot to say here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I think it's not the fact that our community hasn't experienced violence. This has been happening unseen for a really long time.
Yes.
Hate crimes against Asian Americans is like, this is not new. It's just better highlighted. It's just reported better, right? That's what it is. And granted, there have been some really horrific attacks that have been on the news, but our community has had these problems for us. And even this country's policy, right? That's been designed to hurt the Asian American community. I feel like, if you think about like all the laws that we know, the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? The Japanese American internment, like that's violence against our community that we've experienced in every way. After 9/11, think about how our government asked the special registration, and in the dead of winter, all of these Muslim South Asian men had to go stand in line. Like, we know all of this. We know, and so when people say, oh, this is all new, we're saying, no, this is not new. It's just better. It's videotaped now, right? But what I'm feeling really scared. I'm feeling really, really frustrated because people keep asking us, right? Like, so what's the solution? Well, how the hell should I know? Like, my community is a victim. You don't ask the victim what's the solution for you not being victimized, right? I think there needs to be a lot of conversations that need to happen, right? But this is not about just, anti-Asian sentiments, right? I mean, certainly what Wayne said about the model minority myth adds to that, right? But oftentimes, people say, how do we dispel that myth, right? But that myth was imposed on us. So I feel like in many ways, I want to be the rebel to be like, I don't have to respond to that because that I didn't ask that for that myth. I didn't ask for somebody to say, oh, you're successful, you're, we think you are. Like, that's your problem if you think that. However, what I'm going to do is to make sure that what people's wrong impressions and sometimes toxic impressions on us isn't going to harm us, right? And that's exactly what is happening. People are afraid. I mean, people are afraid to leave their homes. This is fact. And I'm sure everybody realizes, but Asian Americans, now we're getting, we're lots of vaccinations. We're starting to have to show up for work. It's summertime. We've got to get back to the office, get back to work. We're afraid to leave our homes. What does that mean, right? And so I think the solution to all of this, but other side of this also isn't that our community isn't the only one who's experienced, this kind of racism. I mean, if you think about the history of this country, think about what the Black community has endured, right? Like, for so long. And so I always look at that, their all of the violence that they experience as the foundation to what is happening, right? Then it's the Latinos, LGBTQ, Muslim Arab community. And, now it's, I guess this the Asian American community's turn, but so it really needs to be a fight against racism, right? All of us against racism. And I think we all need to make some conscious choices to even, not just non-Asians, but even Asians to not embrace that model minority myth, right? Some people I know said, we like it. And I'm thinking, what the hell are you talking about? That is used as a wedge to not give you anything. That's used as a wedge, as an excuse to harm other communities of color. Do you really want to be that person, right? But the other thing that Wayne said about perpetual foreigner, that's why it's easy to harm us, right? Because people think that we don't belong here. You're not Americans, therefore you don't belong here. So therefore I can do horrible things to you, right? Because you're not part of my community. I think that is what is happening. I think we need to push back. And people, even when we talk about Asian Americans, we always have to prove our Americanness. Like, we belong here. We're Americans. Well, and people tell me, oftentimes people say, go back to where you came from. Well, what happens when you come from here? Where are you supposed to go back to, right? And all of us have experienced when people say, wow, where are you from? Where are you really from, right? And what the answer is I'm from here, right? But it's always imposed on us that we don't belong here. We're not part of America, right? And we're all going to be successful without any help from institutions, right? And I think this is that time where we need to be very loud and very vocal in every platform that we have to push back on that. And, to be honest, we just need to, call out bullshit at this point, right? And be really unapologetic about it.
I just want to say I am just so overcome, with emotion hearing you speak, Joanne. I am just really I feel like you pulled together so many threads of this conversation that we've been having so far. And one of those things is talking about, we have to call out racism when it happens on a systems-wide level and on an individual to individual basis. We have to call out bigotry and stereotyping. And really what we have to call out is white supremacy. And I'm not saying white, I think people get confused, and I want to be really clear when I say white supremacy. What do I mean? I mean the system in which the racial caste system that exists in America that prioritizes white people over communities of color. And you can read Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. She's an incredible author. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, happy to talk offline. But I think if we don't call that out, we aren't being really honest about what is happening to our community. And like you said, yes, this is a moment where Asian Americans and violence against Asian American Pacific Islanders is really visible, but this has been happening as a foundation to our country, to Black people, since the beginning. And so I think it's really important as we look out and think about how do we want to build out this movement that we're now seeing to stand in pride of our AAPI heritages and identities, but also not co-opt the Black Lives Matter movement, but also say, how do we learn from the incredible movement that was created to validate Black lives here in America? I think that is a big part of the responsibility that we have as being like leaders of Asian American folks and New Yorkers in our community, and ultimately the country and the world. But that being said, I'm so curious to hear how else, Kapil especially, how you have felt about the spike against Asian Americans. And the city has done a lot of work. Obviously, there's always more to do, but I want to hear directly firsthand from you. We know Joanne is also a part of the Racial Justice Commission / the Charter Revision Commission, and you're a senior advisor to that. Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure, and I just want to say I thought what Joanne said was extraordinary. I had to catch myself as well. I just think it's really eloquent and spoke to a lot of issues as Joanne was talking. Her first statement about how this isn't anything new really struck a chord with me. I still remember how people in the Sikh community post 9/11, as you know, Sikhs wear turbans, were often targeted because people thought they were Arab, and then they continue to face discrimination and violent acts anytime there are issues related to terrorism in our country. So I think Joanne hit the nail on the head. In my position, I think it's really important to use my platform to make sure that people know that there are helpful resources out there, as you were alluding to, Angelene, within the government. I think we're all scared. There's, I was thinking about my parents the other day. They're coming to visit me. My dad loves riding the subway, and I was really thinking about I need to put some more money in my Uber account because I'm not sure. I just was, I personally was just scared listening to, the reports and things like that, even though I know I ride the subway every single day and I feel okay. But I think, obviously in light of the spike in violence, we're all really concerned about what's happening. But I do want to set out a couple of things that I hope people know about, since I know we have an audience that's coming from a diverse array of backgrounds. Recently, my incredible chief of staff, Bess Chu, who I know you know very well, Angelene, put together a panel on anti-Asian violence that drew literally hundreds of people to talk about what the city is doing to address the spike in AAPI hate crimes. Congressman Grace Meng actually led that panel off. And I was, I've been on a lot of panels. I was shocked at the number of people that showed up. I mean, we were talking, at one point, I think close to 700 people were watching that panel. It was in the middle of the day, and it just showed that there was a real hunger for that information. And I think people really wanted to feel like they were in a safe space. So, Carmelyn Morales, who was our terrific commissioner on the Commission on, she leads the Commission on Human Rights, City Commission on Human Rights. We also had NYPD's Asian Hate Crimes Task Force. So if you have a chance to watch that, it's on Counsel to the Mayor website. There's a link there. You all should go to that. But there are a lot of great resources in the city. I'm on the Queens Library Board. They have a recommended list of authors' books for kids, youths, and adults, AAPI authors and books. So I recommend you check out that list. We also have a Stop Asian Hate Toolkit for addressing anti-Asian bias, discrimination, and hate that you can find online. And I'm sure Angelene can send around a link for that. And also in terms of reporting any incidents, look, we all bear a responsibility, not just as leaders, but as citizens of this city, to report things that we see. that involve hate in any way, shape, or form. And we have great resources for that. We have the New York City Commission on Human Rights. We have one of the strongest human rights law in the entire country. So I strongly recommend that those of you that experience or see some type of hate crime to report that to the Commission on Human Rights, and to also report it to the NYPD. We have an NYPD Asian Hate Crimes Task Force that was created in August of 2020. They speak 12 Asian languages. And so again, that's another great resource. We also have an Office to Prevent Hate Crimes, whose sole focus is to look into hate crimes and what we can do to address hate crimes across our city. And finally, I would refer anyone who needs mental health counseling of any type to Thrive. Counselors are available 24/7, and you can contact New York City Well by calling 888-NYC-WELL or texting WELL to 65173. And finally, I would just say our community affairs unit here in the mayor's office is extraordinary. They're all over the city, and you should, as a citizen of New York City, feel free to engage them anytime to express concerns about what's happening within our community.
Thank you so much, Kapil. And I think it's so important that you are the person on this panel who gets to share those resources, because they are so much of what you have fought for in your time during the administration. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I don't know if Joanne, I don't know if we'll have time, but I'm sure Joanne could also address what we're doing with the Racial Justice Commission, of which she is a major part. So I again would, for those of you who want to get involved in that, Joanne is a great resource.
Yes, thank you so much. Absolutely. I also want to say, when we're talking about violence that we're seeing against Asian Americans and Pacific Islander New Yorkers and across the country, we also have to talk about sexual violence and sexual harassment. You know, the reality is, and this is not talked about very often, but Asian women or women identifying Asian folks often are hypersexualized in media and in books, etc. And also that leads to the desexualization of Asian men. And I bring that up because I too have been scared to travel on the subway, of fear of getting punched or something. We've seen people getting slashed across the face here in New York City. But also recently, when I was exiting the subway, someone grabbed me from behind and grabbed my hand and grabbed my bottom, and it was a man, and he went back on the train, and I didn't know what to do. I completely froze. And so thinking about all the ways in which we need to protect ourselves, that we need to build resiliency, I think to the resources that Kapil lined up, that we should be not only engaging with the city's resources, but turning inward to our families and our communities, looking for support and sharing stories. Thank you so much for sharing the link that Kapil was talking about, the webinar. I do really recommend that folks check that out. I want to hear from Wayne and Yin, who haven't gotten a chance to speak on this yet, but how has the spike in anti-Asian violence affected you in your work?
So I always think...
I also want to say we have 5 minutes left in the panel, which is a travesty. I'm wondering if the panelists feel comfortable going 5 minutes over, so we have 10 more minutes to round out the discussion. Does that work? Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, Wayne, off to you.
So I always think back to March 2020, when New Yorkers were told to stay home, my essential workers were out in the community. We were delivering meals, we were helping the most vulnerable, we were providing home health care. We were in our affordable housing, in our group homes, to make sure that the most vulnerable were being supported. We had opened up regional enrichment centers to make sure that children of essential workers could go to work and we could watch their children. And for CPC, that means about 4,700 folks were out in the field at that time. And that means that my essential workers were risking their health and their families' health to serve others. And fast forward to now, as the city has started opening up, we've been reopening our community centers and other programs. My staff are now telling me that they are more afraid of catching a fist in their face than they are of catching COVID. And That's something that's really hard to hear because the death toll of COVID, the economic devastation, the health impacts is something that I don't think we can even wrap our minds around at this time. And I mean, those are just my staff. We have seniors who have been eligible from day one for the vaccine, and they don't want to go to get their vaccines because they're afraid of their safety. We had in a survey of parents in our after school programs, about 70% said they don't want to send their kids back to school 5 days a week when elementary schools open back up because they're worried about their safety. So I do think we need to remind ourselves, and it's true, this is not new. We could go through the whole history from why the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed to Vincent Chin in the 80s to other incidents we heard about after 9/11. This is not new. So let's be all clear and stand up for what the vision is, that in every neighborhood where someone lives, works, plays, worships, and studies, there should be safety, there should be dignity, there should be respect, and there should be belonging and inclusiveness. Having said all that, I do think we need to check ourselves about what is the solution to promote safety. And I understand it's a scary time, and I understand that there's a lot of fears. I want to acknowledge, though, it's really hard when I hear my Asian American colleagues saying, let's bring in more police officers. Let's start our own neighborhood patrols. I'm celebrating the fact that the guardian angels are coming into Chinatown to patrol. And I always remind people that 12 months ago, we were marching for Black lives. We were organizing Asians for Black lives. And we were talking about how the mass incarceration system, the criminal justice system, the police institutions have been failed policies, especially for our Black and brown siblings. And I think this is a hard conversation that we need to have, is what does safety really look like? How can we make sure there's more resources going to communities and community-based organizations? We need to look at violence as it's not just individual, it's also institutional. And we have to own the fact that we as Asian Americans have a complicated relationship with police. Christian Hall, Angelo Quinto were killed by the police. The police were still working with ICE, and we have plane loads of Southeast Asian refugees being deported. We have police that were targeting Asian women workers, to your point, Angelene, about the over-sexualization of Asian women, that massage parlor workers, not all who are sex workers, are being targeted by the police. And I think that we have to look at where else we can report. And I think data is important. So I appreciate what Kapil brought up about that. We can report to the Asian American Federation, Stop AAPI Hate Nationally, the Human Rights Commission, because we need this data so that we know where we can drive the resources for our communities that we already said has not been equitable historically for our communities. So I think, last but not least, I think while there is more media attention and more stories, I am troubled that we continue to see dark-skinned men always attacking older Asian women in our newscasts. And there's actually some national stats. I'm curious what Joanne's stats say, but Professor Elda Choi actually says that over 90% of attacks nationally right now on Asian Americans come from white communities. The perpetrators are white. They're not Black and brown. But why is it that mostly in the news, we're only seeing Black and brown folks attacking Asian Americans? And we have to figure out why wedges and division continue to happen as opposed to cross-racial solidarity.
Yes, and I think that's really important. Like, we should call out those statistics because it actually illuminates the reality of which we exist. And I think, like, going back to something that Joanne said earlier, but it's like communities of color have been pit against each other to fight over the crumbs so that we're not paying attention to the bigger system. But work like Wayne and Kapil and Joanne and Yin, you too, all of that is to dispel these stereotypes that have been so harmful for all communities of color, including our own. Yin, I would love to hear from you, and then we'll start to wrap our program.
Yeah, I can maybe hopefully turn the conversation a little bit. I truly appreciate the work of everyone on the panel. Definitely, and I'm starting to hear about your incident, Angelene. And, you know, it's really sad, but it's not only the threat that's out there, but it's the fear that exponentiates this threat and it impacts us. And so what we've been trying to do in Think Chinatown, because we're a neighborhood-based organization, is take back space and shine light and celebrate and bring joy to your community and be like, it's okay, we're going to be together. So, you know, for instance, we had this like big wearable lantern for Lunar New Year's. Jill saw it because I brought it to her bank. And we just, you know, one night we just had, you know, we just had enough. We're like, that's it. We, you know, went on the street. We had some old vinyls from Hong Kong and Taiwan playing these old school songs. And we just danced in the street and by the newsstand that we program. And just sometimes we just need that release and feeling of community. And that's what makes us feel safe, being together, not more policing, but feeling of community and being together, that you're there for your neighbor. We see each other. And we want to continue to create this space. So for instance, Chinatown Nights is really another representation of that. We're lighting up a plaza at night and bringing more people to Chinatown. We want everyone to be safe, but we also need to take back our part of community and bring hope and joy and celebrate our heritage and be proud of it and show it off and, you know, just, you know, be together sometimes.
Yin, I love that so much and appreciate you turning this conversation into a celebration of our heritage, because that's exactly what we're getting to do this month, right? Like, yes, this is a really troubling time for all Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. But also this is our month where we get to stand up and be proud of who we are, our backgrounds. And I can speak from my own personal experience that it was not always like that for me. I am a daughter of immigrants. My parents are Filipino. They moved here from the Philippines, moved to suburban Texas, where I really learned to hate my identity. And I feel like getting a chance to come to New York City to understand my place in public affairs and what change I want to make in the world and how I want to impact different communities. My identity is my superpower. And I get to use that now and I get to cherish it now as such. And I would love to hear from all of our panelists and also Jill, if you want, as we continue to like wrap this conversation and knowing that this conversation is ongoing, and knowing the audience that is here with us today on behalf of the ABNY community, and I thank everyone who's been here listening to our conversation, how can what should folks do to be more involved, to be more thoughtful about their engagement with AAPI events or museums or attractions, whatever, so that we're not tokenizing and we're not thinking, when we think Asian, we're only thinking East Asian or Southeast Asian. We're also thinking South Asian. What should people do? How can they celebrate APAHM with us, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month with us? Wayne, Joanne, Jill?
Quickly, I think it's great that we have 1 month where we celebrate the Asian American community, but we always know the quips that it should be that month every month. So I think it's great for us to educate ourselves and to celebrate culture, but I just hope that people move beyond chomp and stomp. It's good to eat the food. It's good to have some dancing and cultural performances. But if we're going to talk about change and equity, especially during this time where there is a lot of attention towards the AAPI community, I am heartened by the fact that we have so many funders and allies and government officials and corporate leaders just picking up the phone and calling, saying, what can I do to help? I think that, yes, there's a lot we need to do around violence. But we also need to realize that it's around education and it's around allyship, and that's something we can promote at this time. So let's celebrate AAPI Heritage Month. Let's all get together. Let's make sure we support our small businesses. Let's make sure we show up to the neighborhoods, especially as the weather gets better and we have great activities that organizations like Think Chinatown's organizing. But let's just not dance and eat. Let's make sure to really learn and support.
Yes, I love that so much. Like, let's bring humanity into the experiences and interactions that we're having with the Asian community. One of my favorite things to do is like lingering a little bit longer at like when you're ordering food, whatever, being like, how's your day going? Like, let's chat a little bit. Like, I know you have a few minutes, whatever. And just getting to hear about their lives, you know, talking to my nail salon lady or whatever, you know, like it really is heartening to have a moment where we can humanize each other and that we're not just looking at folks and being like, we're passersby. This is our community. We're all interconnected. We're all New Yorkers. I want to give it to Joanne and then to Jill to close.
Before I talk about Heritage Month and what we can do, I just want to address what Wayne said. I think I share his concern of who the assailants are, always being, you know, this Asian Black, and he's right that the report with the reports that we look at, people who assault Asian Americans come in all colors, but it's not Black. It's I think the majority is white, and I think I want to put that out there. And the other thing that really concerns me is because it's in the media, you can't get away from it. Every night there's somebody posting something on all the Asian websites. At some point we're going to be desensitized to this, right? And so I want us to be really mindful that long after the cameras are gone, we're going to need to live with this, as we have been living with this for a while. And while we have the spotlight on us now, we need to be able to really put up with plans that come up with plans that really support the community, so that, you know, the systems that we have in place will last long after this is over, right? Because we really need to get through this as a city together. I share Wayne's thing about, you know, comment about like the Asian Heritage Month, because I always say like, well, it's great that we have May, but you know, I'm Asian all year long, right? So I don't know what's up with May. But for my favorite thing, what I want to celebrate is I've been to all the Asian neighborhoods, but I think now I'd like to be invited to other neighborhoods, which I don't really need an invite as a New Yorker, right? I am everywhere. I will walk everywhere. I've been really scared to leave my apartment, to be honest. And so I've been very careful about how I go out. I haven't been riding the subways very much. I think it's been less than 10 times in a year. But I can't wait to be back. I can't wait to go out. I think we need to, I agree with what Wayne said. This is not just about like Asian Heritage Month. We're going to go to Chinatown and eat, right? There are many Chinatowns. There are many Asian enclaves, and they're all really great. And you should go and visit them all the time, not because it's like the Asian Heritage Month celebration, but you should go visit them because they're really cool places. And as New Yorkers, this is what we do. We go out and celebrate all the things in our neighborhoods, right? And so visit a different neighborhood and support small business. Support your fellow New Yorkers.
Thank you, Joanne. Before we turn it over to Jill, and I know we have to wrap, I'm getting DMs like we've got to wrap soon, but I want to give the floor to Yin too, to give her closing thoughts, and then to Jill.
Yeah, thanks. I totally agree with both Joanne and Wayne. It's definitely also not just about, you know, just dancing and eating, but how do we focus that energy that you get from this gathering of, you know, culture and art celebration, and focus that on important, for in our case, neighborhood issues, because we're a neighborhood-based organization. So for instance, how do we build that trust through storytelling and creation of art that represents voices from our community? Take that trust and really work on important neighborhood issues to protect our neighborhood. And in our case, in Chinatown, I know there's a lot of other great neighborhoods that Asians live in New York City, but in our case, you know, it is a critical mass where we can get important stuff done. And it is important to think about how we can continue to thrive in our space. And it's not just only about small businesses. I think it's great that there's been so much concern for small businesses, but there are grassroots arts groups that, you know, also, you know, are really senior spaces in our community. There are so many other important parts of the soul of our community that's not only small businesses. So please support the small businesses, but, you know, Chinatown is more than restaurants.
Thank you. And then to Jill to close us out. Thank you, everyone. This has been such a privilege.
Thank you, Angelene. Stephen, do you want to say something before I close out?
First I want to thank our panelists. I think this is an incredible conversation. I feel really privileged to have our community be part of it. I think Wayne saying learn and support, I hope this is part of that for us. I also really want to say, I want to thank Angelene as an incredible moderator, but I think how we have relationships and build relationships with people is a lot about the stories we're able to tell about our experience. So I want to thank Wayne for talking about being a kid and going to school and sort of feeling isolated, or honestly the horrible story that happened to Angelene on the subway, or Kapil talking about his dad selling pens on the street and going to NASA, which is incredible. Or Joanne talking about just how mean kids are. As somebody with 3 little girls, I see that all the time. And Yin talking about what it means to come be part of a community and celebrate and let loose. I just want to say I really am grateful for the depth of this conversation, and I hope it is a start for us to do more. Over to you, Jill.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank everyone for sticking this long and really giving this chance to complete our thoughts. I'm just going to end with something, and this conversation has been wonderful. It's gone from one spectrum of ideas and thoughts. So I just like to end with one thing that I have tried to adhere to in both personal life and business, as well as more in a social context. One thing I always say, this is among my family and within our employees in our bank as well, is that we must honor and respect our past. And I think the things that Ying has been talking about and what she's doing to ensure that these stories and these sacrifices that our parents have made to come here and to be a part of society must be honored and respected and remembered. And that in the present, we must hold ourselves accountable. There is so much to be doing in the present, and we hold ourselves accountable. And by holding ourselves accountable, we hold those who have control over our lives accountable as well on all levels. And that leads to the final. If we do these 2 things successfully, we will embrace and make our future. And without those 2 things, we cannot do that. And so I hope that this is the theme that I'm hearing in this. Respect and honor our present, hold ourselves and others accountable. Respect ourselves and our past, and hold ourselves accountable and others in this present, and embrace and make our future. So I'd like to end that way. Thank you so much, ABNY, for this.
Thank you so much.